Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at a story that is quietly but steadily gaining attention across Eastern Europe and beyond as coup whispers grow louder in Belarus. What once sounded like distant rumors are now being discussed openly by analysts, diplomats, and even insiders, raising serious questions about the stability of President Alexander Lukashenko's long rule and the loyalty of the power structures that keep him in charge. Belarus has long been described as one of Europe's last dictatorships, a country where political life appears frozen in time while the rest of the region has changed dramatically. For decades, Lukashenko has relied on a tight grip over the military, security services, police, and state media to maintain control. On the surface, the system still looks solid, but beneath that surface, cracks are becoming harder to ignore. The idea of a coup in Belarus is not new. Since the mass protests of 2020, when hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets to challenge Lukashenko's disputed election victory, the regime has lived in a constant state of fear. Those protests were eventually crushed through mass arrests, violence, and exile, but the memory of that uprising never disappeared from the minds of the ruling elite. What is different now is the source of the whispers. Instead of coming mainly from opposition figures abroad or Western observers, the talk is increasingly linked to tensions within the state itself. Reports suggest dissatisfaction among certain military officers, security officials, and bureaucrats who feel trapped between loyalty to Lukashenko and the growing risks associated with his leadership. One of the biggest pressures on Belarus comes from its close alliance with Russia. Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, Belarus has been pulled deeper into Moscow's orbit. Although Belarusian troops have not officially fought in Ukraine, the country has allowed its territory to be used for Russian attacks, making Belarus a co-aggressor in the eyes of many nations. This decision has come at a cost. Belarus faces heavy Western sanctions that have damaged its economy, limited trade, and isolated it diplomatically. For many within the Belarusian elite, these sanctions are not just abstract numbers. They affect personal wealth, travel, business interests, and the future prospects of their families. Within the military, there are growing concerns about being dragged directly into the war. Belarusian soldiers and officers understand that entering the conflict would likely mean heavy casualties and potential internal unrest. Many are believed to be deeply reluctant to fight Ukrainians, a people with whom Belarusians share close cultural and historical ties. This reluctance matters because coups rarely start with mass protests alone. Historically, they succeed when parts of the military or security apparatus refuse to act against their own people, or decide that the leader has become a liability. In Belarus, the question is no longer whether dissatisfaction exists, but how widespread and organized it might be. Another factor fueling coup rumors is Lukashenko's personal behavior. In recent years, he has appeared increasingly erratic in public appearances, making bizarre statements and showing visible anxiety about threats to his life. He frequently talks about conspiracies, assassination attempts, and enemies everywhere, which suggests a leader who no longer feels secure. His reliance on Russia has also deepened. Russian security personnel are believed to have an expanded presence in Belarus, and joint military exercises have increased. While this support strengthens Lukashenko in the short term, it also undermines his image as an independent leader and fuels resentment among nationalist elements within Belarus's institutions. For some elites, Lukashenko is starting to look less like a protector and more like a risk. If he falls suddenly or drags the country into chaos, those closest to him could lose everything. In such situations, elites sometimes decide that removing the leader themselves is the safest option. The Belarusian opposition, mostly operating from exile, is watching these developments closely. Leaders like Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya continue to call for international pressure and internal change, but they are also aware that real shifts in power often happen behind closed doors rather than On the streets, at the same time, ordinary Belarusians remain under intense repression. Independent media has been crushed, activists jailed, and civil society dismantled. This makes it harder for the public to organize, but it does not mean discontent has vanished. Instead, anger has gone underground, waiting for a moment of weakness at the top. Economic stress is another silent driver. Sanctions have reduced exports, weakened the national currency, and increased dependence on Russia for loans and energy subsidies. While the state still functions, the long-term outlook is grim, especially for a younger generation that sees no future under the current system. History shows that authoritarian regimes often appear strongest just before they weaken. When fear replaces confidence at the top, and loyalty turns into forced obedience, the system becomes brittle. In Belarus, many signs point to this kind of brittle stability, where one unexpected shock could trigger a rapid collapse. That shock could come in many forms. A sudden health crisis involving Lukashenko, a military incident linked to the Ukraine war, a dramatic economic downturn, or a split within the security services could all act as catalysts. None of these scenarios are guaranteed, but none can be ruled out either. Russia's role remains crucial. Moscow has a strong interest in keeping Belarus stable and under its influence. If Lukashenko were to fall, Russia would likely try to manage the transition to ensure a friendly successor. However, Russia itself is under strain from the war, which may limit its ability to control events in Minsk as tightly as before. There is also the possibility that coup rumors are being deliberately leaked or exaggerated. In authoritarian systems, information warfare is common. Lukashenko's rivals may want to scare him, while the regime itself might spread rumors to justify further crackdowns and purges within the elite. Even so, the persistence of these whispers suggests something deeper. When the same stories emerge from multiple, unrelated sources, it usually means there is real tension beneath the surface. Silence in such systems often hides the loudest conflicts. For now, Lukashenko remains in power, backed by force and fear. But power sustained only by repression is never as secure as it looks. The loyalty of those holding the guns, the keys to prisons, and the command structures ultimately decides the fate of any ruler. As the war in Ukraine continues and international pressure remains, Belarus stands at a crossroads. It could slide further into isolation and dependency, or it could experience a sudden and dramatic shift triggered from within its own system. Whether a coup actually happens is still uncertain. What is clear is that the idea is no longer unthinkable. In a country where political change has long seemed impossible, even the quiet discussion of such a scenario marks a significant shift. The coming months will be critical. Observers will be watching troop movements, elite reshuffles, and subtle changes in rhetoric for clues. In authoritarian states, the smallest signs often matter the most. For the people of Belarus, the stakes could not be higher. Any sudden change carries risks, but so does continued stagnation under a regime that many feel has lost its direction and legitimacy. As coup whispers grow louder, Belarus enters a period of uncertainty that could redefine its future. Whether that future brings reform, repression, or renewed instability will depend on forces largely hidden from public view, but moving closer to the surface with each passing day.